question, though, is what do we do with painful emotions? And it turns out that if we reject painful emotions, if we do not give ourselves the permission to be human, then these emotions only intensify and grow stronger. In contrast,
Hi, Tal. How are you doing?
hi, Ellie. Good. How are you?
We're very excited to have you here and to talk about happiness that a lot of people, whatever age, whatever situation you're in, if you're a doctor, an engineer, a teacher, a mother, everyone wants to know about happiness. So I'm curious, why did you start on this field? Why did you start studying this field?
Yeah, so I became interested in happiness because of my own unhappiness. So I was an undergraduate at Harvard studying computer science. And I found myself in my second year doing well academically. I did well in sports. I played squash. I did quite well socially. And yet I was very unhappy. And it didn't make sense to me because looking at my life from the outside, everything looked great. But from the inside, it didn't feel that way. And I remember one very cold Boston morning, going to my academic advisor and telling her that I'm switching majors. And she said, what to? And I said, well, I'm leaving computer science and moving over to philosophy and psychology. And she said, why? And I said, because I have two questions. First question is, why aren't I happy? Second question, how can I become happier? And it's with these two questions that I then went on to get my undergraduate degree as well as my graduate degrees, all the time focusing on how can I help myself, individuals, couples, organizations, and ultimately nations increase levels of well-being. And that's what I've been doing the past 30 years almost.
That's
Great.
Wonderful. Dianis, go ahead.
Oh, yes. What do you think about science behind happiness? Because first we didn't study happiness as per se. Now it's a course that you can study. So how can you explain what is the science behind happiness?
Yeah, so first of all, the biggest shift in this field occurred 20 some years ago, which is when psychologists got together and decided to study happiness scientifically. Because historically, philosophers talked about happiness in the 20th century and still today. Self-help, gurus talk about happiness. It's part of new age. The difference with positive psychology is that it's the science of happiness, which means that researchers, psychologists, actually asked the same questions. How can I become happier? How can we deal with difficulties and so on? They asked it, and the answer came through the scientific lens. So that was a very big difference that occurred, and a very important one. Mm-hmm. Because it's very easy to say, okay, well, in order to be happy, do what I tell you, and I know that it's the truth. Versus, let's test it. It's a theory, it's a hypothesis. We'll test it and research it, and then find out what works and what doesn't work. And it turns out that some of the things that historically people thought really work actually don't. And that many of the things that we thought would make people happier actually don't. And sometimes even the opposite is the case. So this is why it's so important that there is a science of happiness today.
What are a few of examples that are things that they were tested and weren't really helping to be happier, and which are a few things that do help actually?
Good. Yeah, so let me give you an example of each. So for instance, one of the things that historically people have been talking about in self-help workshops or new age workshops, and I must say, I encountered them in many workshops that I attended, was visualization. So this is how it goes. They tell you, okay, close your eyes and imagine yourself successful. Whatever your dream is, imagine it. And as the saying goes, whatever you can dream and conceive, you can achieve. So this is what this is what we were told. Well, it turns out that it's not so simple. That actually, if I close my eyes and imagine myself successful, that is more likely in the long term to make me unhappy and less successful. Now, this goes against what so many people teach. Right. So Shelley Taylor, she's a professor at UCLA, did research on visualization, and what she found that yes, if you just imagine yourself successful, you'll be less successful, less happy. However, if you imagine yourself successful and then also imagine yourself on the path towards success, then that will make you happier as well as more successful. So for example, I can imagine myself getting, let's say I'm a student, I can imagine myself getting an A on the exam. That won't help, that will actually hurt. However, if I imagine myself getting an A on the exam and then imagine myself studying for this exam, imagine myself putting the work that is necessary to get that A, then that will contribute to my success and happiness. Same with work or relationships. You know, let's say I imagine myself and my partner in an incredible relationship. That actually in and of itself is unlikely to help. However, if I imagine us in an amazing relationship and then imagine all the things that I need to do to make it amazing, that's very different. Now, that's a nuance that most workshops and seminars historically didn't identify. And they were teaching people things that actually hurt them more than help them. So do you see how important science is to test these ideas?
Yes, I feel like when you do the visualization without the path, as you say, of getting there to your goal or objective, then it could be very frustrating and contribute to more anxiety on not getting the end result, right?
Yes.
Because it's not enough. The mindset is not enough. We need action. And that's what I love about what you talk always and repeatedly. If you hear some of Tal's lectures in YouTube, you can hear there's so many. And that's what you say always, to make action. And one of the things that I love that you always say and repeat, and you just said it when we initiated this, the permission to be human. Can you explain what do you mean about this? Because I think it's so valuable what you teach with this.
Yeah, you know, this is an idea that I'm not the first to talk about it, and hopefully not the last. It's been talked about for thousands of years in Buddhism, in some religion, and today more and more so in psychology. And this is the idea that painful emotions are natural. You know, as the Buddha said, suffering is part of life. The question, though, is what do we do with painful emotions? And it turns out that if we reject painful emotions, if we do not give ourselves the permission to be human, then these emotions only intensify and grow stronger. In contrast, if we give ourselves the permission to be human, meaning we allow ourselves to experience the full range of human emotions, the sadness, the envy, the anger, the frustration, the anxiety, if we allow ourselves to experience them, they will not overstay their welcome. They'll come in and they'll flow right out again. You know, there's a beautiful poem by Rumi, the Sufi poet who lived, 800 years ago or so. The poem is called The Guest House. And it's really beautiful because what he talks about there is how we need to entertain and embrace and accept all emotions, all thoughts that arise. We shouldn't push them away, because when we entertain them, when we embrace them, accept them, we learn from them, we grow from them, and they don't overstay their welcome. There's in fact two levels of pain, two levels of suffering. The first level of pain and suffering is the natural one. You know, if I see someone who's hurt, who's being hurt, my empathy will lead me to experience pain. If someone I love is hurt, of course I'm going to be in pain. So that's the first level. That's inevitable. The second level is the level that rejects the first level. If I say to myself, no, I shouldn't be sad, or I shouldn't be anxious, I'm adding another level of pain, of suffering to the anxiety and the pain. The first one is inevitable. The second one is a choice. And we always have a choice about whether we accept, embrace our emotions, or reject them. I'll give you another example. If I experience envy towards a friend, one way to deal with it is to say, come on, Tal, you're experiencing envy towards a friend? That's horrible. You're not a true friend if you experience it. In other words, I'm rejecting the envy. You know what will happen as a result? Pain is going to just increase. Envy is just going to become even more extreme. Whereas if I say to myself, oh, how interesting, I'm a human being, I'm experiencing envy, then it will come in and it will leave just as it came. And then I can move on and act generously and benevolently and kindly towards my friend. So the paradox is that when I reject the emotion, it grows stronger. When I accept it, it leaves, and I'm more likely to act in an appropriate way.
So by rejecting, we're giving it more power, so to speak, in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. It's exactly right.
Okay.
And Tal, talking about happiness, is there a happiness gene? Are we born with happiness? Can we learn it?
Yes and yes. So there is a genetic foundation to happiness. However, it doesn't mean that our happiness levels are set in stone. It just means that part of our happiness levels are determined by our genes. I often say to my students that I'm the right person to teach happiness. Why? Because I wasn't born with happy genes. I was born with anxious genes that go back, generations and generations from, all the stories that I've heard of my ancestors. Now, I had to work on it. I have to work on it in order to become happier. And the key message, alongside the fact that, yes, there is a genetic element to it, the key message is that there are also choices. And these choices we make, as I said, literally at every moment in our life that can contribute to more happiness or less happiness. The key is to be aware of these choices, of these moments when we can go this way or that way.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, what are a few activities, techniques, action that we can take daily to make a big difference? Because I think we're surrounded with a lot of information. We see all the time in text and in whatever. There's a lot of information out there what to do. And many times you don't know what to do with so many information. What action can I take right now with my family or for myself to make my levels of happiness better, to make it?
Yeah, so there are quite a few things that we can do. The key with these things is to do them consistently, persistently, because there is a double standard when it comes to happiness. What is the double standard? The double standard is that on the one hand, let's say I want to become a better tennis player. What do? Do I just read a book on tennis? No, yes, I have a coach, maybe I read a book, and then I go out and practice. Right. Or if I want to become a better musician, is it just enough to read the notes or a book? No, I need to practice. However, when it comes to happiness, there's the double standard, because people think, oh, it's enough if I read the book on happiness, or if I listen to a podcast on happiness, or attended a class on happiness. Not enough. We need to practice. We need to engage in activities, which is why, Ali, why your question is obviously so important in this context. So what do we do? What kind of practices can we engage in regularly to become happier? Mm-hmm. We can, for instance, meditate. we know that regular meditation contributes to our well-being. Now, how do we meditate? We can focus on the breath going in and out, or we can do yoga, or we can listen to music mindfully, or we can pray regularly. It actually doesn't matter what kind of practice, as long as we are present, as long as we're in the here and now, focusing on one thing, whether it's the words of the prayer, whether it's the breath going in and out, whether it's the asana, the posture in yoga. So meditation is one thing that contributes to happiness. Another thing that contributes to happiness is physical exercise. You know that regular physical exercise, as little as 30 minutes, 3 times a week. It can be of walking, jogging, swimming, playing with a ball, whatever it is. Dancing, by the way, the best form of physical exercise for happiness. Yeah. So any physical activity contributes to our psychological well-being, as well as, of course, to our physical well-being. So regular physical exercise is key to a happier life. Learning new things is important. Do you know that there is research showing that people who continuously learn, who ask questions, who read, who go out for walks and learn about the external world, people who continuously learn actually live longer. In other words, curiosity contributes to our physical health, to our longevity, not to mention to our happiness. So that's when it comes to learning. Relationships, spending quality time with your sister or with your friend or family or colleagues, quality time. That contributes significantly to happiness. And when I say quality time, I mean time when we're not distracted, when we're not on the phone at the same time, unless we're talking to them on the phone, when we're not, watching the internet or television at the same, when we're present. That contributes significantly to our well-being. And finally, expressing gratitude. This is something that so many people talk about, and yet all the research points to just how effective it is for happiness. So sitting down every night before going to bed, or we do it with a family when we go once a week around the table, and kids and adults say at least one thing that they're grateful for or that was fun for them. And that contributes significantly to happiness, as well as to health, as well as helping us becoming more generous and benevolent. And speaking of being generous and benevolence, perhaps the most powerful intervention out there for increasing happiness is helping others become happier.
Hi, beautiful. When I hear you say all these different things that we can do, I can't help but wonder, someone who's listening to you, who's having a very hard time right now, or who feels like it's in a very dark place, or with this pandemic even having a hard time financially, in their relationship with their families, their children, or whatever, what's the thing that drives them to apply these things, to make that change? Because like you said, we can read all this information. There's a lot of information in social media, YouTube videos, and whatever, but if we don't act on it, like practice it, then it's not useful. What is that thing that can make someone, motivate someone to try it? Like I'm in this very dark place right now. Where can I find that motivation to apply a few of these things to start making a change and be happier?
Good. So a few things. First of all, it's important to keep in mind that you don't need to do it all. Mm-hmm. In other words, it's not an all or nothing proposition. Even if you introduce one thing, one small thing, as long as you do it consistently, that can go a long way in helping you become happier, because very often that one thing will have an effect on something else, which will have the butterfly effect.
Yes. Yeah.
So for instance, even if I just start with gratitude, after I do the gratitude exercise, I feel a little bit better, which means I'm a little bit nicer to other people, which means that they'll be nicer back to me, which means I'll feel better, which means that I may work a little bit more because I have more energy, and on and on and on in an upward spiral. Right. Same with exercise. Even if it's only exercise that I introduce, that can have a trickle effect
Right.
and impact other areas in my life. So this is the first thing to keep in mind, because you're right, it may seem overwhelming, especially if I'm in a dark place. You say, okay, wow, I have to do all these things, forget it. I'm just going to be depressed in bed and resign to my predicament.
Right.
So that's the first thing. The second thing, keep in mind, permission to be human. There's no person in the world who's exempt from feeling down, from experiencing hardships and difficulties. You know, Fabi, that reminds me of an experience that I had in a class that I taught. So I teach year-long certificate programs. And initially, the way I taught it, today it's all online, but in the past, I used to meet students for a week, then we'd have about a year online, and then we'd meet for another week. So during the second week, in other words, the end of the year, there are 200 students there, you know, and there is a Q&A session where they ask me questions and they share. And a student who's sitting in the second row, there were many rows, but she's in the second row, puts up her hand. And she says to me the following. She says, you know, Tal, I'm an accomplished psychologist. And I actually knew about her background. She's a very successful psychologist in North America. You know, I'm an accomplished psychologist. I have many patients. I have a PhD in psychology. I'm studying positive psychology. That is what the certificate program was about. I'm considered an expert by many people in the field of psychology as well as positive psychology. However, I sometimes feel like I'm a fraud. And I ask her, how do you mean? And she says, you know, I sometimes feel like I'm fake because even though I teach these things and I help people get through, you know, hurdles and hardships, and I know what to say because I know the research and I know the information and I've studied a lot, I feel like I'm a fraud because sometimes I go into these dark places. And she begins to cry as she's telling me this. And I say to her, thank you for sharing. Do you mind if I ask a question to the rest of the group? Again, there are 200 people there. And she said, sure. So I asked the rest of the group, I said, I'd like you to put your hand up if over the last 3 months, you have been to one of those dark places. So I asked this question and she's looking at me and I say to her, just look behind you. And she looks behind her. Everyone has their hand up.
Right.
And she looks back at me and I have my hand up and I say, me too. We all go through these dark places. And, you know, I spoke to them before about the permission to be human. We're all there at times. And then I look at her again and suddenly I notice something in her eyes. And I say to her, you don't believe me, do you? I say, you don't believe me that I also go into these dark places at times? And she said to me, no, I don't. Because you see, what she sees is she sees me talking about these ideas and I'm fluent with these ideas. You know, this is what I dedicate my life to. And she says, okay, everyone experiences, or many people, but not him or this other teacher or this other expert. And when I become a teacher like him or like that expert, I'm not going to experience it too. And it was a very important lesson for me as well as a teacher to understand how deeply rooted this misconception is. That people really believe that it's possible to get to a state where you're experiencing nirvana constantly, where you're always happy. It's not possible, or at least I haven't discovered it, or any of the people, the experts that I know, they haven't discovered it. You know, what the science of happiness is all about is not eliminating painful emotions. It's about helping you deal with painful emotions. What it is essentially about strengthening your immune system, your psychological immune system. What does it mean to have a strong immune system? It doesn't mean you don't get sick. It simply means you get sick less often. And when you do get sick, you recover more promptly. And understanding that, really internalizing this fact that suffering and pain and dis-ease and envy and sadness and anxiety, accepting that they are part of who we are, that is halfway there in leading a more full and fulfilling life. So that's the second very important thing that I would say to that person who is in a dark place. You're not alone.
Right.
We all experience it. And when we feel that we're not alone, it makes it so much easier, so much more manageable to deal with it, because then we understand that there is hope, that this too shall pass, just like it passes for everyone or almost everyone. And you know the difference between sadness and depression? The difference between sadness and depression is that depression is sadness without hope. Depression is sadness without hope. And when we know that we're not the only one, when we're not alone, then it gives us hope. The other thing, and related to what you said, what do I tell a person who's in that dark place? I tell them, don't wait. Don't wait till you're motivated to act. Just act. You know, there is a common misconception that many procrastinators have. You know, procrastinators, there are people who put things off, who say, mañana, you know, I'll get it done. I'll get it done tomorrow.
Yes.
And the key difference between procrastinators and those who don't procrastinators is that procrastinators believe that motivation must precede action. Motivation first, action second. Those who don't procrastinate, they don't fool themselves. They realize that motivation doesn't always precede action, but rather that it's the other way around. Action needs to precede motivation. So just do it, just start, and over time, motivation will accrue. Over time, motivation will come. You know, just the question though is, what do we do with painful emotions? And it turns out that if we reject painful emotions, if we do not give ourselves the permission to be human, then these emotions only intensify and grow stronger. In contrast, if this morning I experienced that, so I woke up for some reason feeling very, very tired. Maybe it was because I ate late last night, which I don't usually do. I don't know why, but I woke up without much energy, and I really didn't feel like writing, which is what I do every morning. However, I reminded myself, action precedes motivation. I got on my computer, and 15 minutes into it, I forgot that I had no motivation. I was already into it. Right. Action precedes motivation.
That big lesson there.
Yeah, big lesson. And you know what, Tal? Here in Empieza Contigo, we just started this podcast in November, just like friends doing this. We wanted to share experience, and it's been a lot of success that we didn't even think about it. And what I get in conclusion is the need of people, of hearing stories and connection, and what you always say. And I told them, Dianis and Ellie, and Fabi, I heard that you say something about the best self-help are the stories, the biographies, the stories around us, my neighbor, my grandmother, my sister, whatever. We learn a lot about stories. And that's my conclusion about this success of this podcast, about sharing stories of regular people. I think we have more common than we don't. We all have suffering, what are all of the things you're saying. And I like about that, everything, we need connection. And the number one factor of being happiness, I know, is relationships, and you just talked about it. But right now, in this pandemic, it's just that here in Mexico is really hard. The economy is going really hard. We have a lot of messages of people that, yeah, I know to be positive and to do exercise, but how do I do it? I don't have enough money to feed my children and to pay the school, and it's really hard. So what would you say, like, to those people, the stories around us, we connect, we're like creating more of like community to help each other, but what would you say to that?
Yeah, so let me share a story.
Yeah.
I love stories.
I love stories. It's just that it's that was an aha moment for me.
Yeah.
to realize you can read whatever specialist in whatever field, but if you don't, it's more, I mean, I learned more the connection of people around me, of stories, true stories, than a book of marriage.
Yeah.
I learned more about marriage of my grandfather who had like 50 years of marriage or something like that. I mean, that's like, that made me a connection that is true.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have so much to say about this, of course. So let me begin with where you ended. With,
Yeah.
you know, you learned more about marriage from your grandparents than you
a
did
book.
in a self-help book about marriage. So they did this research. This is University of Rochester. About taking newlyweds through therapy. So marriage therapy. So this is one group, preparing them for marriage. And a second group, what they did was they got them to watch movies about relationships. So different movies. And then they had discussions around these movies, the couple. And what they found 3 years later was that those who watched movies and talked about these relationship movies were more likely to be together.
Wow.
In other words, it contributed to their relationship, prepared them for marriage in a more effective way. Now, what are movies? Stories. You watch or you listen to a story and then you discuss it and you learn so much. So I couldn't agree more. The other thing that I want to say about this is that, you know, many physicists have been talking about finding the unifying theory of the universe. So Einstein was looking for that one formula. Niels Bohr was looking for that one idea that explains everything, whether it's subatomic level particles all the way to, you know, the stars. And physicists haven't found the unifying theory of the universe, and, you know, maybe they never will. Maybe only God knows the unifying theory. However, I do think there is a unifying theory of psychology, not of physics, but of psychology. And I really believe that the unifying theory of psychology is stories. Think about it. Everywhere you look in psychology, you find the power of stories. For instance, you go to a therapist. What is therapy about? Therapy, you go in there, you tell your story, you come out 50 minutes later, you feel better. Stories. You see all the research on journaling. Jamie Pennybaker, Laura King, and many others. You write in a journal about your difficulties, about your best experiences, whatever. You feel better. You become happier. What are you doing in a journal? You write a story. You think about leadership. Who are the best leaders? The best leaders are storytellers. Whether it's the best political leaders or the best leaders in organizations, in business. The best teachers are storytellers. You look at cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology studies memory. What do we remember best? Data? Numbers? No. We remember stories. Wherever you look, you find stories at the core of psychology. So stories are the unifying theory of psychology. Now, let me get to your question after this very long introduction. So here is a story I want to share with you. 2 years ago or so, I was invited by Sura. Sura, you know, a bank. It's headquartered in Colombia, but has offices in Mexico and throughout Latin America. And I was invited by them to give a lecture in each one of their big geographies. So I spent time in beautiful Mexico and in Colombia and in Chile and Peru. And in every place, they wanted me to also talk about new research. So they wanted me to conduct research. And I said, great, I'll do it happily. And I asked them, what's my budget for the research? And they said to me, unlimited. And I said, you shouldn't say that to a researcher. I said, no, I'm unlimited. So I said, fine, be that way. So I went out and did research, looked at happiness levels in Latin America. And because I had unlimited budget, I used the control group as the rest of the world. So I compared Latin America to the rest of the world in terms of happiness. And we found some fascinating stuff. For example, we found that Latin America is the happiest region in the world. But I must say that wasn't a surprise because we knew that already. We know that Latin American countries are generally happier than other countries. But there was one other thing that surprised us. And I remember I was on a flight when I saw that in the data set, and I almost jumped out the window. I was so excited. So here is what I found, or what we found. What we found is that, yes, Latin America is the happiest region in the world. However, we also broke it down into age groups. And we looked at 18 to 34-year-olds, 35 to 54-year-olds, and then 55 and up. That's how we broke it down. And the Latin American countries were happiest, all thanks to the older generation. Meaning, if you only looked at the younger generation, 18 to 34-year-olds, Latin Americans were not happier than North Americans. They were also not happier than Europeans. The interesting question is why? What is the difference between the older generation and the younger generation? And we found two differences, one small and one big. What accounted for a bit of the difference was spirituality. So the older generation was more spiritual. Part of the spirituality came because they were more likely to go to church. Other parts of spirituality was because they found more meaning and purpose in their life. So it could be religious or secular. The biggest difference, though, between the young and the old generation was, in Latin America, was relationships. Now, it wasn't that relationships weren't important for the young generation. They were as important as they are for the older generation, but they looked very different. For the older generation, relationships were face-to-face. For the younger generation, too many of the relationships were online, virtual. And unfortunately, 1,000 friends on social media are no substitute for that one best friend that you meet with, you interact with, you play together in the same sandbox. So virtual is no substitute for the real. That was our biggest conclusion from that research. Now, that's great, but it's also a problem, Ali, in terms of what you're talking about. What do we do today?
Yeah.
What do we do today? COVID-19, social distancing, quarantine. We can't hug as much anymore. And Latin America is a very tactile society, you know, hugs all the time.
Yes.
And there's a lot of research showing the benefits of hugs. What do we do in the world today? What do you tell someone who's not getting, and most of us are not getting our quota of face-to-face interactions, not getting our quota of hugs? So today, the distinction between virtual and real relationships is not that helpful. There is another distinction, though, that is helpful and is important to make. And that is the distinction between superficial and deep relationships. Superficial and deep. Because I can have a virtual relationship with someone, you know, sending emojis and LOL and, you know, just brief WhatsApp messages. Or, you know, so that would be superficial. Or I can get on the phone and talk for an hour with a friend, or get on Zoom and interact with my sister or family or colleagues or friends and really spend time, quality time together. So the fact that we don't have the real today, or as much of the real today, doesn't mean that we need to do away with depth of relationships. And that is crucial, because loneliness hurts us psychologically as well as physiologically. And the way to overcome loneliness is not by having 1,000 likes on social media. It's by having 1,000 minutes of conversation with friends and loved ones.
Right.
No,
Oh,
so
Tal.
true, so
Yes.
true.
I feel like there's I feel like we're in a huge world experiment with this pandemic going on socially, with behavior, human interaction, everything. I feel like it's an amazing forced opportunity to learn from this and to get
Grow.
data from this
Yeah.
as well, because I would never imagine something like this ever happening during my lifetime, you know?
I know, I often say when I talk during these times, I often say to the people, unless you're 102 years old, you've never lived through anything like it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, it really are unusual times, and you're right, it is an experiment, and hopefully we will emerge stronger and better from it. And it won't just happen, meaning we have to consciously go through it and consciously decide to learn, and even more importantly, apply our learning. After 9/11,
Right.
some of my colleagues did research specifically in New York because they just by chance happened to have data from before 9/11. So they tested, the same traits and variables after 9/11. Some of the things that they looked at was kindness and generosity and empathy. And what they found was very clearly, New Yorkers became a lot kinder, more generous, more empathic, more benevolent as a result of 9/11.
Right.
Which was nice, which was heartwarming to observe and to see. But when they went back a year later, they were right back where they started. In other words, that change, that positive change that so many experienced didn't last.
Right.
And I really hope that this will be different. And I think it will be different, first of all, because it's not just one event that, happened, a very powerful event, but one event. This is ongoing. So hopefully, we have more time for this new normal
Right.
to become natural, for the neural pathways to form, and it takes time for neural pathways to form. So hopefully the change will be lasting, but still it will be up to us to be conscious of the change and then to implement and make sure we consistently implement that change.
Totally.
One more thing, Tal. We as parents, we want to raise happy kids. And in these times, how can we raise happy kids?
Yeah. The question I think should always be, how can we raise happier kids, or how can we become happier? Because, when people ask me, Tal, so now after 30 years doing what you're doing, are you finally happy? My answer is, I don't know how to answer this question, because I don't think there is a point before which we're happy, after which, or before which we're unhappy, after which we are happy. I rather think it's a continuum. And on that continuum, we can always become happier. So yes, I'm a lot happier than I was 30 years ago, but I also hope that I'll be happier 10 years from now than I am today. In other words, it's a lifelong journey. So in these times, kids are struggling, and it's natural and it's fine. And the last thing in the world that we need to tell them is, don't be sad, don't be anxious. You should be so lucky because you have food and you're safe and you're healthy. No, that's not what they need to hear. What they need to hear is that it's okay to struggle, that it's okay to give themselves the permission to be human. The way we do it, most importantly, is when they bring up an issue, we're there and we listen. This is the most important thing we can do for them. This is the most important thing, by the way, that managers today can do for employees. Right. This is the most important thing that partners can do for one another, is to be there and listen. Less advice giving, more sharing. This is in general, quite true. It's especially true in difficult times. So that's one, listen, be there for them. Second, kids do need boundaries. They always need boundaries. They certainly need boundaries today. So for instance, during regular days, we limit screen time for our children. And we usually limit it to 1 hour a day. And again, this doesn't include, if they have homework on the computer, then, they have to do it. But we limit it to, 1 hour a day when they can, play video games or, interact with people online. Other than that, we tell them, get out, play basketball, go out and, for a walk, go see your friends. Today, it's different because for children, many children, the only way of interacting with their friends is online. So we let them be online for longer, play their games. But still, we set clear boundaries. Why? Because it's very important that they exercise during this period. Extremely important. Many people say to me, but, we don't have space. We're in our apartment. I tell them this story. This is a story of a prisoner of war. He spent years and years in prison. His name is Harpaz. He wrote about this in his autobiography after he was released from prison. And what he wrote about was that he was put in a cell which was about 3 meters by 3 meters, where he had, the toilets were there, and he had a small desk there, and of course he had his mattress there. That was his life. He was in solitary confinement for years. He said one of the things that kept him sane during those years is that every day he would exercise. How did he exercise? He would make the figure 8 in the room. He did it 600 times every day. That was his daily exercise. Now, if he could do it, I don't think we have an excuse. Whether it's jumping in the spot, whether it's, if we can go outside, even better. If we have a stationary bike, great. But we need to find a way to exercise and to move. And we need to get our children to move. They can't be in front of those screens all day. Very unhealthy.
Yes.
Third, they need to also interact with us. We'll have, meals together. They don't need to talk if they're in a bad mood or if they're teenagers. It's okay, but they need to be there. They need to be present with us. So these are the basics. In addition, distraction is important. Distraction in the form of fun things, enjoyable things. It could be watching our favorite comedy. It could be watching our film with the movies with the whole family. Doing things that are fun so that it distracts away from the concern and worry that are there, that are natural. But it doesn't mean we need to experience them 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Thank you for the
Yes.
advice. Very important. Listen.
I can tell when I hear you talk about Diani's question on parenting in these difficult times, and I hear you speak about all these boundaries. I'm not a mother at the time, but I can't help but wondering of applying the same boundaries that you just talked about on my own life. Like if everyone takes care of their children and worry about them and want them to be happy, why not want to place some boundaries to ourselves and to make us like be healthier, happier, and place some boundaries in our day, practice some exercise, have that conversation with someone, that's quality time with someone. Like those sound like great advice for everyone, not only children, right?
Absolutely. And I'll say even more than that. It has to start with the self.
Start
every
with
time
you. That's our name. Start
Our
with
name,
you. Empieza
yeah.
contigo. That's our name. Starts with you. You have the choice. So I love that you say that because it's true.
Yeah. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's a North American philosopher, once said, I cannot hear what you say because what you do speaks so loudly. So our actions are more important than our words. So with children, we need to lead by example. As Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world.
Right.
This, though, also addresses a much broader point that I want to talk about a little bit, because I think it's so important. And that is that many people have said to me over the years, you know, yeah, I pursue happiness, it's important, I realize it's important, but I feel uncomfortable doing it. And the reason they give for feeling uncomfortable doing it is because they said, because it's selfish. Because pursuing happiness is about thinking about me. What justification do I have to do it? And here is my answer. You know, if you open the dictionary and you look for synonyms for words that mean the same as selfish, here are the words that you would find. You would find evil, bad, immoral. Selfish is about being self-centered, inconsiderate. These are the words that you would find for selfish. Now, no one wants to be all those things. I don't want to be evil or bad or self-centered or immoral. So selfishness has gotten a bad reputation. Now, look at the opposite. Let's look at the word selfless. You look at words that mean the same as selfless: moral, saintly, kind, generous, altruistic, moral, ethical, and so on. So there's a very clear distinction between these two words. The thing, though, is if you think about it, when you think about yourself, when you contribute to your own happiness, what happens is that you're also helping others for various reasons. First of all, because you're leading by examples. Children will ultimately do what you do, not what you say. Employees will ultimately do what you do, not what you say. In other words, if you lead a life where you contribute to your own happiness, they will also contribute to their happiness. In other words, by helping yourself, you're helping others. Not only that, you increase levels of happiness for yourself, you become more generous, you become kinder. You go on a plane, what's the first thing that they tell you? They tell you, in case of emergency, put your oxygen mask on first before you put it on the person who's dependent on you. Because in order to help others, you first need to help yourself. In other words, this distinction between selfish as bad and selfless as good, it's an unhelpful, in fact, it's a very destructive distinction. The two have to come together. The word that I would use instead of being selfish or selfless is being self-full. Self-full, because it's when I take care of myself, yes, selfishly, egoistically, yes, then I'm also helping others and taking care of others. They go hand in hand. I'm being self-full. So, you know, Fabi, when you say we can apply all these things to ourselves that I was talking to Dianis about, it's not just that we can, we need to do it. Right. This is the moral right thing to do, to first apply to self and then by extension, apply it to others as well.
I feel like the word selfish got a very bad reputation in our language, right? But I feel it's our responsibility to live our lives as happiest as we can and to take care of ourselves. It's no one else's responsibility. So I feel like that resonates with me. Like, you have to take care of yourself to take care of others, but first take care of yourself, because then, as many say, your glass will be full, and that's when you can share. Exactly. If your glass is empty, you can't share anything, right?
Yes.
Or comments or ideas you want to share with us, Tal?
Yes, I'd like to end with a story. So, you know, Fabi, you said we need to take responsibility. So one of my teachers, Nathaniel Brandon, writes about self-esteem. And his book really had a lot of, a great deal of impact on my life. And I ended up writing my dissertation, my PhD work on his work. And when he talks about self-esteem, he talks about a few pillars, foundations of self-esteem. And one of them is taking responsibility. And the way he teaches it and the way he writes about it, he says, we take responsibility when we truly understand and internalize the fact that no one is coming, that no knight in shining armor is coming to save us, or a princess bride is coming to liberate us, or a great manager or a great leader. No one. It's up to us and us alone to make the most of our lives. That is when we take responsibility, when we internalize the fact that no one is coming. So he was teaching this in one of his 3-day workshops. And towards the end of the 3rd day, he talked about this, and a student from all the way in the back of the room puts his hand up. So Nathaniel Brandon says yes, and the student says, Dr. Brandon, I understand the importance of taking responsibility. I also understand the metaphor, the story, the idea that no one is coming. But Dr. Brandon, I disagree. So Nathaniel Brandon asks him, how do you mean you disagree? And the young man says, well, Dr. Brandon, I disagree that no one is coming because Dr. Brandon, you came. So obviously he was, overwhelmed and grateful for what Nathaniel Brandon was teaching. And Nathaniel Brandon just pauses for a few seconds and thinks. And then he says, young man, you're right. You're right that you're right that I came, but I came to tell you that no one is coming. and this is the important message. You know, we need to take care of ourselves so that we take care of ourselves and so that we can take care of others. And if that is also the message that we communicate to our partner, to our children, to our loved ones, then that everyone takes care of themselves and takes care of others, then we create the ideal society, an interconnected society where we're constantly helping others and constantly being helped. It's a web of interconnectedness, a web of empathy.
Right. Well, it's wonderful having you here with us, Tal. At the end of all of our conversations in our podcast, we talk about what each of us take away from this conversation today. And I don't know, Dianis, do you want to kick us off with your ideas or what you are taking home today?
Estás en mute, Dianis.
You're muted.
Sorry,
Yes.
I was. First of all, thank you, Tal, for being here with us and sharing all these beautiful stories. I take with me that I have to be aware of the choices that I make, because life is full of small choices since we wake up in the morning. So I think that I have to be more present in those choices that I make every day, and to be persistent, because if I'm persistent, my children, my teens are going to be persistent. If I don't do exercise daily, they won't do exercise daily. So one of the things that I take is practice.
What about you, Ellie?
I have a lot of things to say. I'm very excited. Yeah, I truly am. And anyone who's listening, I'm one of Tal's students in Happiness Studies Academy, and who wants to start, you should. If you're thinking about it, you should. It's really a great program. I've been doing it. I've been learning a lot from him. I think that I know him because I see him almost every day. But it's really great to surround yourself with these kinds of learning, of these kinds of conversation, of new ideas, to take into your personal life, or to your others, or to teach it. It's really, really great to have fresh ideas and new ideas of the new things in this field of happiness. Is very interesting, and it's going to be for your life, for all your life. I think these tools, learning these tools should be in schools, should be in every program. So I take a lot of this conversation, but one of the most thing that popped to me in this conversation was you don't need to do it all. Me as a mother, me as a podcaster, and I want to do everything professionally, as a mother, as a wife. So that resonated with me. You don't have to do it all. One day at a time. It's the permission to be human, the permission to take it easy, to enjoy it. I've been really enjoying time here at home with this pandemic, to enjoy my kids. They grow so fast. So that's what I take about this conversation, to don't need to do it all. And you, sister, what do you take from this conversation?
Well, definitely, I even took notes. So
yeah, me too. Notes.
I'm very grateful to that we had this opportunity to talk to you, Tal. But if I had to choose only one idea from this conversation, it would definitely be not to wait to feel motivated, to start with just one change or one thing to do, to be persistent, but not to wait to feel motivated. I feel like it's such a wrong idea that we might have on motivation. It doesn't have to feel great. It doesn't have to we don't have to feel the motivation before we act. Just act, like just go for it, right? And I'm definitely starting today, not mañana, and applying this, right? And well, last but not least, before we leave, Tal, I don't know if you'd like to share an idea that you would like our audience to reflect on what would that be? Like an idea maybe that you would love our audience to
one more idea before you leave.
We had all these ideas, but we love concluding with this because it helps. We feel like it helps to like talk about it again, you know.
So let me share with you an idea that I've been thinking about a lot, and again, it's very simple and straightforward. But I think it has made a big difference to me, and I think can make a big difference to many people, and that is engage in conscious and proper breathing. You know, we talk about breathing and we say, well, what do you mean? I breathe, and you know, when I stop breathing, I stop living. I don't need to think about it. Well, it turns out it's not so simple or straightforward, because many people today breathe through their mouths most of the time. And of course, when I talk, I breathe through my mouth, but it's much healthier when we can. It's much healthier to breathe through our noses. And it turns out that if we become more aware of it and spend more time breathing through our noses, we'll lead physically healthier lives as well as psychologically healthier lives. So I would like to also recommend the book that opened my eyes, or my nostrils, I should say, to this idea, which is a book by James Nestor, Nestor, on breath. And even if we take, again, small changes make a big difference. Even if we take just 3 or 4 extra deep breaths a few times a day, we remind ourselves, we set the alarm clock to remind us to take 3 or 4 deep breaths through our nostrils. That in and of itself can make a difference.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you, Tal. Definitely, we're leaving with a lot of great ideas and actions that we can take. And so we're very grateful. It was wonderful having you here with us. We would love to have you again sometime soon, maybe.
That would be wonderful.
And well, it was an honor.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really an honor, Tal, to say it, Tal. I'm very grateful because you teach me and I teach friends and I teach family, and it's like the paid forward kind of thing. So really making a greater community. I really, truly believe it. So thank you. Thank you, Tal.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Fabi. Thank you, Dianis. I'm very grateful that you're taking these ideas and making them accessible. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.